C'est tout ce que tu peux m'offrir, ton désir. Et moi, qu'est-ce que je fais de mon avenir? Ne t'es-tu jamais demandé ce que j'allais devenir avec la solitude et ton souvenir? Tu me demandes pourquoi il faut réfléchir. On pourrait simplement se découvrir. Comme une mosaïque, les couleurs qui s'éclatent dans tes yeux. Tu dis que c'est merveilleux. Tu dis que c'est merveilleux. Plaisir, c'est tout ce que je peux t'offrir, du plaisir. Et même si j'essaie de me retenir.
I have actually, literally, seen the grown sons and grown daughters of clients who came to me 20, 25 years ago.
I do not allow clients of mine to say I can't. I don't allow them to say it's impossible. They get to say I won't do it, I won't try, I don't care to, I don't want to get into that, the hell with you, Barbeau. They get to say anything that accepts responsibility, but they do not get to say I can't. You are the most powerful person in the world when it comes to controlling what you choose to do or don't do in regard to the conditions of your life. Now,
in other words, that God writes straight with crooked lines, and that each individual has to work out his own destiny under grace, and is really free and responsible for themselves, ultimately, for their own creation.
You can't coerce me into loving you. It's a free gift or it's nothing. You see, it's not, you can't grab it away from me somehow. You know, I either give it to you or I don't.
and loving is so danged easy. That's what I mean when I say that really, basically, loving comes down to being simple. It comes down to a matter of my welcoming change.
I had a phone call one day from a woman who could barely talk. She talked like this, and over the phone, and she wanted to make an appointment and so on. And so we made the appointment. Well, she sits on the sofa and I'm sitting in an easy chair, and she says, I'm going to have to leave on time because of I have a doctor's appointment about this. And I said, what seems to be the trouble aside from, she said, well, I've been to 2 ear, nose, throat specialists already, and this last one just referred me to this one, and they can't figure out what's wrong. And I said, oh. And so she talked like this all the while. And and as we discussed her problem, it had to do with the fact that the fellow she'd been living with for a couple of years and thought she was going to marry had abruptly, she had come home to an apartment where he had taken all of his belongings and some of her cash, as well as that she had left in a bureau drawer, and as well as some of her stuff, and disappeared to arise again in a former girlfriend's house. And and that was the issue she was bringing to me because she was so in such grief over it. And at a given point, when I was learning more about her background, I suddenly said, something tells me you're scared. Right now, you're really fearful. Am I scaring you? Is there something in this room that's scaring you? And I said, what are you afraid of? Well, you said on the phone that at the end of the session, you would decide whether I could be a client of yours or I could decide that you weren't the proper therapist for me, and I'm afraid of failing at being a client of yours. And of course I laughed. I just thought that was hilarious, that somebody was going to be afraid of failing at therapy, you know. So I laughed and I said, why do I think that this isn't the only thing you've been afraid of failing at? I mean, obviously, you're probably blaming yourself for this failure of your relationship, and now you're worrying about failing at being a client. Why do I have the impression you've... Oh, she said, I've always been afraid of failing at anything. My parents, when I was very little, if I failed at something, they let me know. They were ashamed of me and how dreadful that was. On the other hand, if I succeeded at something, then they'd say, that's very good, you know, that was expected. I said, well, we've got to take care of that, and I am an expert on this because I've never failed at anything in my life. I've never failed at my writing, I've never failed at my marriage, I've never failed in any way about parenting. I am a perfect therapist. And of course her jaw began to drop as I'm saying this. I said, do you believe any of that? And she said, well, no. Fearing failure to give the correct answer, I think, she stammered out a no. And I said, no, the only person I've ever heard of who was absolutely perfect was nailed up before he reached the age of 35. And the world doesn't like perfect people. You know, it's obvious. I said, so we've got to take care of this fear of failure you have. And I picked up a beautiful paisley pillow, she was. And I said, now, it's pretty attractive, but you have to imagine that that's your fear of failure out there. And I want you to understand that emotions like that are not who you are. They are something you're carrying around, and that's it. Right there, your fear of failure. I want you to turn to that, and I want you to tell your fear of failure to go to hell. So she turns around and she starts, fear of failure, I hate you. Fear of failure, you've stopped me from doing anything I want to do. Fear of failure, and she starts in. And her hands curl. And she's curled fists now. And I said, well, you look like you want to do something more there. Well, I'd like to hit it. I said, go ahead, pound it, hit the hell, beat it up. So she's saying, fear of failure, and meanwhile her voice is rising. Okay, and she's clutching at the pillow and shaking it and saying, fear of failure, you've just corrupted my life, and fear of failure, and she's got a rather normal voice. At which point I said, throw it away. She tossed it over towards me, and it landed. And I said, oh, that isn't throwing it away, that's just setting it aside. Pick that damn thing up, I said, and I ran over to a window, which opened the window and said, throw it out the window. She said, I can't do that. I said, you never say you can't do something. You throw it out the window or you clutch it to your breast and keep your fear of failure forever. Throw it out. And she threw it out the window. And I said, shout something after it. And she said, go to hell, fear of failure. And I said, perfectly wonderful exorcism of your fear. Now, I said, go down the hall and there's a bathroom there. I want you to look at yourself. And she went down there. I ran down the front and got this precious pillow out of the gutter, and I brought it back up and dusted it off and threw it in the closet and closed the door and sat down. And when she came back, I was sitting there very calmly. And I said, what'd you see? She said, I was smiling. I said, what else did you see? Well, she said, I realized I've gotten my voice back. I said, yes, you've gotten your voice back, and you have succeeded in becoming a client of mine, and the session is now over. Even as a tiny tot, I'd accompany my brothers, and we would look for papers, bottles, aluminum, brass, copper, anything like that. We knew the price of everything. 6 cents a pound for copper, 6 cents a pound for aluminum, 6 cents a pound for brass, you know, which we could take to Rosenberg Junkyard in Sacramento. And we would sell these things, and the money would generally, most of it, end up on the kitchen table to help provide food for the family. Now, in those days, you could get into a movie for a Royal Crown bottle cap and a dime. And of course, you could spend 4 hours there. I mean, they'd have 2 features, they'd have about 10 serials, 15 cartoons, and so on. You went in and you came out and you were stunned by the light, And we would go to Arata Brothers behind the shop and go through the vegetable cans, the vegetables being thrown out, and see if we could peel down a lettuce head and make a healthy one, and so on. See what we could find that we could bring home for dinner. And
where I put my time, I cannot repeat often enough, is where I'm putting my life. I have no life other than this, you see? Kid comes to you and says, I'd like to talk to you. You say, I don't have time. He gets to add 2 words to that, for you. Because as long as I'm breathing, I have time. When I stop breathing, I am into eternity. I'm out of time. When I stop breathing, I'm into the grand orgasmic now called heaven, hopefully.
The earliest vivid experiences that had a long-term effect on me were when I, in the 1st grade, in a parochial school, we were told to fill in, this was a sort of art exercise, to fill in with our colored pencils this elephant that was hectographed. Hectography was the only way you could reproduce things in those days. And this nun, a little German nun, she said that the neatest paper would get a star on it and be put on the board. So I went up and I sharpened all my colored pencils, and I came back. And even as I came back, I could see that everybody else was just scribbling away like mad. And of course, scribbling, they were running over the lines everywhere, see? So I took the trunk and colored it one color, but I started at the line and worked inwards. And I did it with everything, with the tail, with the ears, with the body, with the legs. I had this multicolored elephant, and nowhere had I gone over the line. And so I knew it was a pretty good paper. So we were told to bring up the paper when we were finished, and I proudly took my paper up, and as I came up the aisle, I could see everybody else was scribbling all over the page. And I handed her the paper fully expecting to be applauded for having a perfect paper. And what I got instead was a scream. This gal went explosive, and you cheated. You erased. And of course, I'm this little tiny kid, and I say, I didn't erase. Now you're a liar. And I'll show this class what we do with the papers of cheaters and liars. And she tore up my perfect paper and sent me to my desk in disgrace as a cheater and a liar for having done a perfect paper. Now, if that doesn't have an impact, and I was, as I say, it was either the 1st or 2nd grade. If that doesn't have an impact, I don't know what does, because for years, when I first started writing as a teenager and sent a story off that I hoped somebody would publish, or an article, I always had this dread that somehow they would say that I plagiarized, or somehow they would say I stole it from somebody if it was too good. You know, I mean, that had a long-term effect.
When we get enough of those blows to our self-esteem, and we all have received them, I have only met one person in the world who did not receive a single, even slight blow to her self-esteem for the first 12 years of her life, and I had the unmitigated guts to marry her. I mean, hell, that was something, a marvel. But
then it came to the point where I quit. In about the 5th grade, I told my mother that I wanted to go to the public school. I didn't tell her it was because I had lost faith. And by that I mean that the nuns were so good at describing hell. Most of them had been there, I'm sure, because they could describe every single detail. It was like an Hieronymus Bosch painting of the tortures one underwent in hell. And if you missed even this much of the Mass, you were going to go there. Well, my mother didn't make Mass that often because with 10 kids, one of them or another one or both of them would be having measles or chicken pox or something, and she'd be staying at home. And so I really reached the conclusion that I did not want that I could not believe in a God who was going to put my mother in hell for staying home and taking care of sick children.
It doesn't matter so much what hits us as it does how we choose to respond to it. To this person at this moment, whether it's a little person in our homes or a big person in our homes, whether it's some neighbor, whether it's somebody at work, our choice is always how we're going to respond to that event or that person.
I had a woman phone me and her daughter was anorectic. And I said, well, I don't deal with anorectics. I don't know enough about anorexia to do that. And she said, oh, and I said, in fact, she may even need to be hospitalized for that. And the woman on the other end of the phone said, oh, we've spent $250,000 last year on hospitalization for her anorexia, and she's been in the same state since. I said, well, what makes you call me if she's been under such care for a year? Well, she won't go to another therapist, she won't go to a psychiatrist, she won't go enter another hospital. She's told us that, but she'll see you. I said, how does she know me? Well, you talked at her high school, and she said she trusted you. So I said, well, there's nothing for it. You have to bring her in. So the mother drops her off. First question, I said, when I ask you this question, I want two answers to it. The first one is, did anybody else ask it in the last year? You've been under a lot of care. And the second one is, what's the answer? Okay, when did this begin? Nobody asked. Now, how the hell do you try to treat somebody when you have no idea of what caused it to begin? She said, well, my dad's hunting dog got killed in an accident. And he took my dog and turned him into a hunting dog for himself. Now, there is no place in the world where our affection can get so attached. See, he had taken from her the love of her life. But the fact is that we project a lot onto our pets. And what her best friend in the world had just been ripped off from her and was in the care now of her father, a sportsman who was using him as a hunting dog. She was starving for love. And she was also purging. I mean, whenever she did eat anything, she'd go and vomit it up because... So I began to utilize something else that I knew was there. And that was the fact that she decided she respected me. She was struck by my presence in as a member of the audience and so on. And in a sense, there was puppy love going on. So I'm ruthless in my use of such things when it comes to helping people live. And so I said at the end of that very first session, I say, we're going to take care of this, we're going to take care of it, and you don't need to starve yourself for love. After we had had 4 sessions, I said, I have to see your father before the next session. I had to go through 3 secretaries to get to her father. Then I get to the ultimate secretary, and I give him the same spiel, and finally he's on the phone. And I say, I have to leave town. Oh, he says, your wonderful work with my daughter, improving. I say, I don't want to talk about that. I need to see you before I leave town. And I'm leaving for da-da-da. And he says, oh, well, let's see. Well, we can't do it on Monday because Monday I have an important staff meeting here. Let's see, and we can't do it on Tuesday because I'll be in Los Angeles on Tuesday for an important meeting. And Wednesday's out because Phoenix is in. And I said, Mr. So-and-so, I'm talking to you about the life and possible death of a beautiful young girl who happens to have the great misfortune of being your daughter. And you're talking to me about goddamned business meetings? You call me back in 5 minutes and tell me which of those times I gave you you're going to accept, or you go to hell. And I hung up. Within 5 minutes, he had phoned me back, and he made an appointment, and he came in, and I told him what was going on. She needed his attention. She came in for her 5th appointment, which was before I was leaving for Hawaii, the day before, and the last one I could have with her for that time. And she said, well, I don't know what you tell my dad, but he made an attempt. I say, well, try to nurture him a little bit in terms of getting more out of him. I told her, when I come back, I want to hear you've really changed your eating habits or non-habits and so on. And sure enough, she did. She had pretty well changed these things.
From the time you and I were born, we were developing our coping mechanisms. We were born, there we were, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 22 inches long, thrust into the world. A highly stressful event. It stressed Mommy, it stressed the doctor, it stressed Daddy, and it stressed us. And from the moment we were lying there in the crib, this totally helpless being, supposedly, we confronted one of our first coping tasks as we looked at the giants lumbering around the room. And the task was how to get them to obey. When they didn't even speak our language and were 20 times our size.
Well, my father was an interesting guy. He had a grocery store in Boise, Idaho. Well, first he was in the Army when he married my mother, and she married him because he didn't ask. He just came in and told her, I've got the license and I've got the priest wedding. We're getting married. And so he was in the Army during World War I. Then he had a grocery store, and they had a big grocery store in Boise, Idaho. But he was a gambler. And one evening he won $10,000 gambling one evening. And the next evening, gambling with the same people, card playing, he lost the $10,000 and the grocery store. So then he piles all their belongings onto a truck, and he's going to head to California. And as I recall it, the truck, somehow the brakes gave way or something on a hill, and he ends up telling her to jump, and he jumps, and they end up with the truck demolished and impoverished again.
When my father was dying, he was in the hospital, and I was visiting him, and one of my brothers came by who had not received the word. He was traveling, and he was traveling through, and he hit the hospital, and I was there. And I announced to him, Daddy is going to be dead by morning. And he said, oh, yes, and we talked about that a little bit, and then we went back in and visited with my father, who was really non-compos mentis. He had Alzheimer's for the last 7 years of his life. And then my brother said he was going to visit my aunt and uncle, who lived 12 miles from that hospital, and then he was going on to Sacramento, where all the siblings were. And I said, look, I don't have enough change with me. When you hit Tony and Connie's house, be sure and phone the boys in Sacramento. They may want to come up and say goodbye to him, since he's dying tonight. And you might want to tell your aunt and uncle that. And he said, yes, he would, absolutely, yes, He went to visit his aunt and uncle, and they were about to leave for vacation. They asked how, quote, Louis was, and he said, wonderful, couldn't be better. The denial was so powerful that he literally didn't hear a word I said, ignored the
the conversation of myself and the doctors and so on and so forth. None of that entered his consciousness, though he sat there and agreed, or stood there and agreed. I kid you not. That's how powerful denial can be. This not only ain't happening, I don't even consent to having experienced it happening. Okay, that's part.
Considering the fact that he was, he could be violent, put it that way, I had no negative unfinished business with my father. I had let go of that years before, but I made sure I had none when he was dying. And it's a nice position to be in. Yeah.
Well, I don't believe in making therapy junkies. I don't believe in making people dependent upon therapy. Basically, however, I very often work with couples on a week-to-week basis, depending upon how long that couple needs help. I try to graduate them fast. I try to put myself out of business regularly. This is called success. And so recently I was asked.
One of the things that's intriguing me these days is that so many people in my profession have just discovered something they call mindfulness. And why it's astonishing to me that they're making such a fuss about it, including some of the giants in my field, is that I thought that that was the essence of therapy to begin with. And I'm not trying to put myself in some seer position, but it was when I went to Japan on my rest leave and spent a few days, 2 days, with a Zen master, and I learned an awful lot, and Zen wasn't heard of over here at that time. He summed it all up when he said that Zen archery, where you catch arrows shot at your chest, the Zen tea ceremony, the koans of the Zen monks, and he didn't have too much respect for them for various reasons. All of these disciplines were to teach you but one thing, and that was the art of doing what it is you are doing. Well, I knew even then about Brother Lawrence's sacrament of the present moment, as he called it, which is that he could be, quote, as in the refectory when he was washing dishes or something in the monastery in the 17th century, that he could be as much in the presence of God there than he was kneeling in the chapel all alone in front of the Blessed Sacrament. He was talking there about being present again, you see, and being calm at the center. That makes sense? So what happens is that from my point of view, this is the only moment I'm alive. Now, there are people who don't know that in themselves because they're rushing towards the future, or their depression is about something that happened in the past. So much of my therapy for years has simply been letting people be present.
I think that the best clue most males can have in their relationships, those present particularly, and any who are watching this on film later, is when your wife says, "You never talk to me," she really means, "I feel really cut off." You're missing something there, and you might take that for a clue, or "You don't pay any attention to me." That's a clue. Now, the husband who rejects that is talking from weakness. I don't know what else I can tell such men other than that, you know, the loving gesture is to lay down that armor. The wives, you know, the crowbar might come in handy. The crowbar of divorce is used, the crowbar of separation. Very often that crisis is the one that blows him into a new orbit, unfortunately. That's the only way he wants to grow. But some men will listen to the gentle hints, you see, of the thrown frying pan or the smashed TV set.
Understand, please, that fear is always of what hasn't happened. And very often some people get controlled by fears that are unrealistic. when we realize that, then we begin to understand why the Aikido master can catch arrows shot at his chest, because they're coming in slow motion. He's seeing them every inch of the way. On the other hand, most of us, we see that arrow coming, we go, I'm dead, and we are. From my point of view, the baseball player Mickey Mantle was a man who really knew Zen. He didn't know that, but he practiced it, because when they'd ask him how he could hit the fastball, he'd say, oh, well, they're coming in slow motion for me. He's focused on, I'm going to hit this ball. He's solely in the minute, and he's waiting for that ball to arrive so he can hit it. The guy before him, let's say, strikes out. Why? He gets up there saying, I've got to hit this one if we're going to win the game, because there's a man on third and this will bring him home. And boom, there goes the ball. Because he's in the future. He's futuring. And so his eye isn't really on the ball. He's thinking about what he's got to do here. And so he's going to miss it. Then you get the other guy.
So that if I'm talking here and people are making funny faces, they're going, oh my God. You know, those of you who've seen the coping series know that I might not know what I'm doing that's causing those reactions. And then if you say, Barbeau, your fly is open, that's called the dawn of awareness, see? And the moment you've said that, I get to respond to that, because now I know how in this relationship I'm causing some people to go, oh, that poor man. Other people go, oh, gee, I'm so embarrassed for him. And other people have their private hopes, and others with their secret dreads. But the moment you say that, I get to make choices about my new response. What do I want to do? Run from the stage screaming and say I'll never speak in public again? Do I want to pretend to drop the chalk and zip up down there, or waddle to the blackboard and do it here? Or, you know, or I could do what I did when it happened. Yeah, in a nursery school once, I was talking to all these parents. 100 parents are sitting on little nursery school chairs. And I went over looking for an insight, and I looked down, and I noticed my fly was open, and I said, well, will you look at that? And 99 people who hadn't been looking looked. But at any rate, so I boldly reached down to zip it up, and the zipper was already at the top. It had opened from the bottom. So I said, if you'll ignore it, I'll ignore it, and we'll get on with this. And that's what we did. But back at the...
I was 11 and a half years old and had spent December 6th, the night of December 6th, 1941, I had spent with a Boy Scout troop. They were waiting for me to be 12 in April, because then I'd be a member. Right now I was sort of an honorary member. And we were on a Japanese farm and down near the river, and we watched them kill a pig, you know. Because that was what they were going to do on the farm. But we were camped along the river there next to the farm. And we had hiked out there on Saturday, and on Sunday we had hiked back home. And it was as we came back into Sacramento itself, it was about a 5-6 mile hike we had done. And as we hiked back into Sacramento, we hit the service station we had hit on the way out. And the station manager came out and said, I don't think you may have heard this, but Pearl Harbor has just been bombed by the Japanese. It was Saturday, December 7th. And when I got home, which was not more than an hour later, I found my older brothers, all of them standing there, saying, I'm going to go in the Air Force. I'll be going in the Navy, you know, and they were all, and they all had chosen their fields. And boy, they were there.
But most romantic love is rooted in that projectionism that you're going to meet all my needs, you're perfect, you're this, you're that, I'll translate your vices to virtues, etc., or I'll project on you negative stuff.
Well, a woman who had been a client of mine was an executive with a major firm, which had a tall building in San Francisco, and she phoned me one day. I hadn't heard from her in a year or two, and she phoned me and said, Clay, I have a young woman in my office. We've just stopped her from jumping off the top of our tall building. And I don't want her involved with the police, but the first person I thought of that might be able to help her was you. So she drove her employee, basically, over and introduced her at the front hall, and the employee was absolutely drained of any energy. She was severely depressed. I realized immediately that we weren't going to get very far from just, what's right, I said, I've been in this chair most of the morning and my back hurts from this chair. If you don't mind, I'm going to have to lie down on the floor because of my aching back. And I had my shoes off, of course, and I put one of these pillows on the floor, and I put my head on it, and I lay at her feet. Now, I'm laying there with my feet just barely, an inch away from her feet. I'm lying on the floor. She's looking down at me for the rest of the session, right? I'm looking up at her for the rest of the session. It was, again, a situation where she thought she was going to marry this guy, and she had discovered the evening before that he had departed with her money, her belongings, as well as his, ripped her off. They had been living together. She thought it was serious business, they were committed, and it turns out he wasn't. And so but it turned out also that her upbringing was such that she had been maltreated even as a child. She had a mother who literally punished her children by throwing them out in the snow and locking them out of the house overnight and things like that. So she never knew real love. So here I am lying on the floor now, counseling her from that position, so that when we dealt with a number of issues in a more orthodox way. But when I stood up, putting my shoes back on, and led her downstairs where her boss was waiting, the boss, the first thing she said was, "How'd it go?" And it was the young woman who answered, "I feel so much stronger now." And that was the beginning of healing for her. She was now in charge again. And her batteries had been recharged, if you will, because when you look up to somebody, you're giving them power.
If I can accept the dark side of me, you see, I can accept it when you kick me in the shins. I can accept the dark side of you too, in other words, okay? Because the kinder we are to ourselves, the kinder we're going to be to everybody else around us. It becomes the basis for other relationships. You find that the people who are very hard on themselves, very judgmental about themselves, are judgmental and hard on everybody else. They're difficult to live with, okay?
One day when I was still toddling around the house, basically, a preschooler, we had a terrible storm in Sacramento. That was not unusual. We had terrible storms every so often. But this one, I was standing with my father and my mother at the door onto this alleyway, which was closed, but there was a window in it. And my father shouted, "That power line just went down." And sure enough, there was a power line whipping around outside of our door. And it was still pouring down rain. And he opens the door and goes out and grabs the power line. And he says, before he grabs it, it's going to catch that house. It was a neighbor house across the alley. It's going to catch that house on fire. So he grabs the power line. And I watched my father flying through the air, and bouncing down into the mud and flying into the air. And my mother was, of course, screaming. She hadn't been able to stop him. I mean, he just went. And I'm standing there staring at my father, foaming at the mouth and flopping up and down. And a man came from the Palm Iron Works bearing a plank, actually, not a stick, but a plank. And he came running down, and he pushed the wire out of my dad's hands. And my mother was, meanwhile, as he came close, he shouted, "Call an ambulance," and she got out of her shock state and called an ambulance while he was pushing this wire out of my dad's hands. So I'm now left alone here. So I walk out to look at my dad. The wire has been pushed out of his hands, and he's lying there as still as can be, green in the face, foam all over his face. And I really, it's pretty calm there, you know. I mean, I'll never forget that. He was home in what seemed a very short length of time, with a bandage on his hand, and he had burned off part of the thumb and parts of these fingers, and they became a claw, which when he became an alcoholic and started swiping at you with that, that was, you know, bad news. I could never say that my father befriended me, if you will. He was just my father. And through my period of growing up, in my teen years, he was an alcoholic, which made it even more difficult. But when my mother died, I remember being with one of my older brothers when they delivered the news to him. He was bedridden at home. And he was already in early stages of Alzheimer's. And his first words were, when he was told that she had died, were, "Oh my God, and she never did a bad thing in her life," which I believe is probably true.
In high school, by the time I got to high school, I was kind of a loner. See, lived in my own little world a lot. And you know what? When I went to my 25th high school reunion, it was amazing how all those people had aged. I literally went there and I stepped out of the room looking to. I thought sure I was in the wrong place. See, this looked like some sort of geriatrics ward, and not my. And then I discovered it was really the right place. I don't know how they had done that to themselves. But I began to get feedback from some of the people I'd gone to high school with, you know, who were now sort of delighted to know me. And they said things like, "Well, you know, you were such a snob." Or, "I really wanted to know you, but I figured you weren't that friendly." Or they said, "Oh, I'd see you going down the hall, and I think you would be somebody I'd really like to know, but I just found you unapproachable." Now, what were they doing? I wasn't unapproachable at the time. I was a lonely kid at the time. What they were doing was projecting upon me their notions of where I was at, and therefore cutting off the possibility of becoming friends at that time. And a lot of us do that. See, you're walking down the hall, and I say, "Hi," and you go, and I say, "He hates me. I've just done something wrong. He's going to fire me tomorrow morning," and so on. That's all projection. For all I know, you were backing out of your driveway and ran over your dog, and you're just full of the pain of that, and I mean that, and you're full of the pain of that, and you didn't even hear me say hi, but I projected on you immediately all sorts of interpretations.
I was going to the JC in Sacramento, and one evening I went out to a farmhouse in Woodland one weekend. I bicycled out there to have a place to be quiet and write and so on. It was there that I ran across a record by a singer of Ravel's songs, and it was the songs of the Auvergne. And they were absolutely mesmerizing. And I played that record about 4 times in a row. And the next, when I went home on Monday, I quit school. And I decided I was going to go to France. Not interested in any other part, but I was going to the Auvergne. And the Auvergne was interesting to me because of these songs, but I had also, even as a tiny tot, seeing literature about France in travel brochures and things. I wanted to see Brittany. I also knew from having read Mont Saint-Michel and Chartres that I wanted to see Mont Saint-Michel and Chartres. In those days you traveled by steamship, remember? They didn't have jets. And I didn't have any money, you know, so and I was living at home. But I got this job at the State Personnel Board. And I remember there having more than once a day actually, running these machines and thinking every minute here is a minute in France, every hour here is an hour in France, every hour here is an hour in France. By the way, on the very first paycheck I got, I went down and put $25 down on a boat ticket to France. And that way I was committed, and I knew the date I was leaving and everything else. And then I'd come home and give my mother some of my money for board and room, you know. And then I had the rest in the savings account so that I'd have some money to spend in France. The adventures of that time were fabulous for me. I mean, I bicycled France. I was the first American in any youth hostel in France during that period, until I got to Nice and I was told there was an American, they thought he was American, who had been there on a motorcycle. You know, but that's cheating, so to speak. But when I arrived home, what I had waiting for me was a letter from the draft board informing me that I was to be meet a bus and to take me to Fort Ord the next day. I mean, and so within 24 hours of all this wonderful, idyllic, peaceful, spiritually clear, I ended up at Fort Ord confronting a corporal who was saying, "All right, all you sons of bitches, move over here." And various other colorful phrases.
You got into you, I said. It's useful for us to remember that we carry around a whole cast of characters in us. See, if there's a foot soldier in me out of the experience of the Army, there's also a lonely 12-year-old in there. There's also a scared first grader who was maltreated in the first grade. There's also, you know, and I can go down the line. And we all have all those characters in us, all kinds of characters. It's really useful not to disown any of them, especially not to disown the disreputable ones, because then we'll stay unknown to ourselves, see? And then we'll also find it more difficult to like other disreputable people. Well, it's true. What I reject in you is what I'm most scared of in me, right? Right? Yeah, good. Okay. And so sometimes when we get into these situations, it's necessary to take a look at what part of me is holding me back, or what part of me is scared of this, or what part of me is angry at that, and what am I really responding to? Because, for example, if I overreact to something you do, overreaction by very definition means the reaction is out of proportion to the cause. The action I'm taking now, the effect is out of proportion to what caused it. So then, therefore, the cause is not in what just happened. What just happened triggered something in my past. And I'm now responding to whatever it is I'm guilty about, or whatever happened back there, or whatever happened in those days. Okay.
But that whole notion of the cast of characters is very important from my point of view, because it accounts for certain behaviors. So when I recognize which character in my great cast of characters is coming out, I can decide whether or not that's appropriate at this time or not. You know, I teach a lot of my clients about this, so that they don't have to, that the adult in them can take care of the child in them at times. Things like that, which are rather simple from my point of view, but never entered their heads before, that they're acting like that child that was hurt in the early years or whatever, or that was betrayed when they were teenagers, or you name it, that they are no longer that person. They don't have to be, but they can conjure up what that person means to them, etc.
The acculturation process for the macho or a rugged individualist male, etc., is no longer around. Those men who continue to follow that path are obsolete in terms of man, woman, and family relationships.
One of the things that was done regularly was we were awakened at about 1 in the morning and for mail call. And we were to troop out, out of bed, get on, mail call, and you'd crowd around this supply room porch with one light globe above, and private winery would go, or corporal winery, private Barbeau, whoever, and throw it out into the crowd of 320 men. And whether it was a package or a letter, that's the way it went. And he'd mispronounce the names and everything, and so you grovel around for your letter. Well, I had had enough of this because we also knew the majority of guys who were being sent to Korea weren't coming back. That's all there was to it. Now, and I thought, why wait to go? Why continue going through this hell? If I'm just going to be going over there and getting killed, I may as well do it here. We're getting live ammunition the next morning for the rifle range for the first time. And hell with this business. I've been to Paris. I've seen everything. I have, I really felt that I had, what better life could you have had? And so I didn't. The 1 o'clock call came, lights went on and everything else. And I didn't get up. And the guy who had the bed opposite me pulled on my leg, my toes, and said, "You got a letter, Barbeau." We all had our last names above our things. The last name above his pocket was Eastwood. I was later to discover it was Clint Eastwood. He threw it on my chest, and it was a picture of those two people there, the Stankies, Gerhardt and Elizabeth Stanky, who had befriended me. And on the back, Elizabeth had written, "This is to remind you that life was once pleasant, with grand adventures of the spirit, and your present condition will not last." And she wrote that, underlined that, will not last. But you, underlined, must, underlined, last through. Elizabeth, Gerhard, Marcel, and Jim. So I didn't bump myself off. The woman who wrote that was a heroine of the French Resistance.
It is not uncommon for people who, having weathered the storm, on the other side, to begin to discover that all the time that went into that relationship is now free to go someplace else. The energy that went into that relationship is now free to go someplace else.
Then I had the woman, it only took one session, just one session. She's a self-contained woman. By that I mean she's in control of herself. She's very poised. She's a very elegant dresser. She obviously is well fixed. And she knows precisely what she wants me to help her with. And it is the fact that she's been, ever since high school days, a person who's been fiercely independent for herself and built her own business world and her own thing. And when she decided she needed a companion for sex or a trip or whatever, she could choose one and dump him afterwards. They were disposable, so to speak. She didn't put it that way, but that's what was going on. But now she had a gentleman who was flying in once a week on Friday evenings, and they would spend Saturday and most of Sunday together, and then he'd fly back to his area on Sunday evening. They would have spent Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning and Saturday night, of course, together. And he wanted to marry her. And her problem with that was they always had a decent time together, etc., and he was good company and da-da-da. But from Monday morning until Friday evening, he wasn't there. She didn't think of him. She didn't call him. She had things to do. She was a professional woman. And she said, and this was her dilemma, because he really wanted to marry her, and he kept proposing, and he kept, sending these romantic notes and things. But he wasn't there. So I said, well, I think I've got your remedy. See, we'll make an appointment for next week at this time, but I said, you feel free to cancel it. What I want you to do, because she was seeing me on a Monday, I said, what I want you to do is, during next weekend, ask yourself at regular moments during the day, for those 2 days, is he here when he's here? Because my hunch is if he's not there when he's there, when he's not there when he's there. She phoned me on the Monday after the following weekend and said, you're right, I don't need to see you again. He's not there when he's there. See, because if he were really there when he was there, he'd be there when he wasn't there. One day, I informed the captain that I was going over to classification and assignments to volunteer for Korea. And when this particular lieutenant, first lieutenant, got that word, he said, Barbeau, I understand you volunteered for your team volunteering. I said, well, I've already put my name in. He said, listen, I can get you off the needs of the service. You're vital to this commission. You're one of the best instructors we've got. Here's a 3-day pass. Go home. And, is it girl troubles? Is it money troubles? What is it? And I said, nothing. I just thought I should go. How do you explain to him that I thought I should participate in what my generation was going through, if I'm going to write about him? And so he gives me a 3-day pass. And I go home and I get I get a suit fitted for me at Best Clothiers in Sacramento. And I bought the suit because I figured I'd be killed in Korea, and therefore I didn't want to be buried in uniform, and I was leaving a note to that effect. But anyway.
I agree entirely with the notion that God made me, that I am created by God, and that in her infinite wisdom she holds me in existence from moment to moment. I agree with that notion, and I'm aware of the fact of the fragility of my own existence and that I could drop dead in a moment. Okay? I know that. However, the fact is that from the moment of my birth until the present moment, I've been actively involved in the co-creation of myself, and you have too.
I phoned my friend Bob Lyons, and I said, what are you up to, Bob? I'm in town, and I just, he said, Clay, wonderful. There's a woman in Levinson's bookstore. Now, we both used the term woman because at that time in this culture, women called themselves girls. When they were 60 years old, they talked about getting together with the girls and so on. I mean, it was just that way. But we understood authentic women treated themselves as full-blown human beings, not girls, but adults. But at any rate, he said, there's this woman in Levinson's bookstore. He said, and she knows my name. And it's gone on so long, I don't dare. I don't know how to get her name, and I don't know how she knows me. And I really, I'd appreciate it if you go in there and find out how she knows me. So I decide, well, I've got my suit, so I dress in my suit, I get all ready, and I go down to Levinson's bookstore, and who should come up to me when I'm browsing at the front end of the store but this marvelous critter. And she says, can I help you? And I look at her. Now you have to remember, I've been in basic training, I have been in leadership school, so in my best command voice I say, if I need anything, I'll let you know. Boom, she runs back. I mean, she really went back fast and sat down behind the counter at the other end. So now what do I do? I mean, so I meander back there, and she's studiously reading this book. And it's Barbeau by Parlagerbeest, and it was he'd won the Nobel Prize. I said, he's won the Nobel Prize, is it any good? She said, I haven't finished it yet. I said, oh. Now I'm trying to figure out how to get Bob Lyons more words out. So I say, do you know a person called Bob Lyons? Oh, he's a very good customer of ours, she says. And I say, well, how well do you know him? Oh, he's a very good customer of ours. I said, oh, this isn't getting me anywhere. So I say, next time he's in, tell him Clayton Barbeau asked about him. Oh, she says. And I said, which of my reputations has caught up with me?
And especially when I look at my own history, you see, I was away from the faith from the time I was 12 until the time I was 24. In fact, the major problem Myra had in getting married to me was, could she marry a non-Christian? And especially one who wrote her letters from Korea saying, how can you bother to worship with a bunch of psom-brain jackasses with YMCA smiles? You know, that sort
Tactful
of thing.
he always was.
You see, I met Myra one day. I told her the next day why I couldn't marry her. She said, I haven't proposed. I said, but sweet, I'm heading you off the pass. I don't believe in games. If I proposed to you now, you'd say yes, wouldn't you? And she said yes. And I said, you see what a favor I'm doing, telling you that I'm not about to marry you. And the next day I changed my mind, and then I volunteered for Korea and went away for 10 months to think it over. Because I was really a very full-fledged member of the Bohemian mystique, having lived on the left bank and so on. I believed that an artist couldn't marry. You know, marriage was death for a writer. I lost most of my Bohemian friends the moment I got married. In those days.
I don't know if I told you about the woman who was standing in the audience when I was being escorted out after a talk, and I had to catch a plane. And I saw her row had pretty well emptied at this side where I was coming down the aisle. And I saw her, and I stopped and said, wait a minute, to my caretakers, if you will, like people guiding me in to get me to the airplane on time, so to speak. And I went over to her, and I said, you're going to be okay. And she looked at me, and I said, can I give you a hug? She said, yeah. I gave her a hug. If you typed my speech, it would be a jumble. But what I was saying was touching every nerve in her body, if you will, in the sense of all kinds of issues coming up and everything else. And she was still bewildered by all that. Now, I can't tell you why I followed my impulse when I was coming down the aisle and saw her, that I stopped, except that what I sensed about her said she needed somebody to tell her that. You're going to be okay, see? It's the same thing, but it did come down to the fact that coming down the aisle, I was paying attention. That's what I'm driving.
Right now, we're sharing in the same experience. We're talking, right? I'm talking with you. You're right here in this room. But you see, I have a better view than you have. You're prettier than I am. And the experience is totally different because we're two different persons. We're sharing this experience, but it's a totally, this whole thing behind you, the back situation, mine is different. You're looking at a different world than I'm looking at. See, you're a different person, different history. Yeah. Now, if we keep this up, we'll be in that. This is going to get scandalous. If we keep, anyway, you see what I mean? Yeah. So that I can't presume to know what you're feeling towards me. But if I'm projecting in a negative sense, I might very well decide she doesn't like me. Or she's finding me too da-da-da. And if I do that, then what have I just done? I've set myself up for an emotional response to you that's totally out of sync with what may be going on over there. See?
My war in Korea was a little different from a lot of people's. After being a rifleman, I was pulled back from that to go to the company headquarters, and I went, and there was a lieutenant waiting for me, and he said, we need you for counterfire. We've checked your Area 1 scores and so on. You're a quick learner. We need you for this work. And I said, I'm a rifleman. I said, I don't want to be back at the rear. He said, you'll be at the front more than any foot soldier, which was true, because we stayed in as long as the regiment stayed. But companies and battalions were pulled back on a regular basis and things like that. I was on the rear slope of this hill, And I heard the rounds go off, mortar rounds. And I dove into the bunker. I put my helmet on, I put my vest on, I had the machine on, and I was getting ready to run out where the button was so I could catch the sound of the rounds, the next ones, but I had to wait until these landed. Only they didn't land. Instead, what happened was pop, 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 these like enlarged champagne corks going off. And sure enough, the tail assembly of one of those rounds, a table assembly, just all by its little lonesome, hit the front end of my bunker, the hole. And I was never more petrified in my life, because I thought, they're gassing me. Those bastards are gassing me. It's against the Geneva Convention, and it's not fair. And I was so furious. The fury overtook any fear. I was just angrier than hell. Of course, I thought I was going to be killed, but I was angrier than hell. It was unfair to kill me this way. And I heard the troops across this little valley. I hear the troops. They're on the front line there, and they're laughing. So I dare to pop out of the bunker now and see what's going on. And they're laughing because they're jumping around, catching propaganda leaflets. It was a kind of a counterpoint to the loudspeakers that they would choose when they would say, GIs, come over, we give you whiskey, cars, and women. Whiskey, cars, and women. So here it was, the most innocent thing to happen to me in Korea, the most harmless thing to happen to me in Korea, was also the one that scared me the most. You know? I've never forgotten it. I'm not just scared, but it was anger. It was, my reaction was basically just feeling it was a dirty trick. You know? On one of those occasions when I was had a companion on the hilltop, we shared a hole in the ground that was not tall enough to stand up in, and we had just our sleeping bag lengths, you know, on either side, and then the equipment there. And on a clear day or a good day, you know, you could sit outside and read a book or write, because they weren't always shooting at one another, you know, thank God. And he was always writing to his girlfriend. One day when I was home in Santa Clara, and I was moving something, and I found his address, his home address, that he had given me before he left Korea. And I thought I'd write him. So I wrote him a note. I said, I don't know if this is going to get to you or not. It's been a few years since you gave me this address, but I was just wondering, did you marry the girl you were writing to, you know, and has it turned out as wonderfully as you imagined it might? And do you appreciate being in a room, living in a place where you can stand up and where you don't have to worry about somebody shooting you? Do you appreciate having, when you're freezing cold, and by God it was cold, and we didn't have proper equipment for the cold. When you're freezing cold, you just turn up the thermostat, or when it's really hot, and the summer was really hot, you just turn on the air conditioner. Do you appreciate being able to walk down the street without fearing that, you know, with your head up, without fearing that somebody will put a hole in it? And I went through a little routine like that with it. The letter I got back was, until your letter arrived, I never, ever allowed thoughts of those days to enter my head. Yes, I married the girl I was writing to, and of course it didn't turn out as wonderfully as one expects, and da-da-da. And no, I didn't go on to university. I'm working in my father's firm, da-da-da-da, da-da-da. And then he came back with questions for me. well, did your marriage turn out to, did you marry the girl you were writing to? Did it turn out as wonderfully as you imagined? You were going to go bicycle France. You were going to write a novel. You were going to, about the war. You were going to go to university. How did things work out for you? The reason I almost didn't write him back, aside from the fact that he had gone through hell on earth, part of it with me, without learning anything, not learning a damn thing about life. But also because, but I did choose to write him back, because I wanted to sort of give him a lesson. I said, I married the young woman I was writing to, and every day it gets better than the day before. I said, and we now have a few children. I am at the University of Santa Clara and enjoying that. And I said, but we both bicycled Europe together as our honeymoon. And yes, I did write the novel, and it just won the Phelan Award in Literature for his best novel by a Californian author that year. But the thing that I thought he was really missing was the lesson of how to appreciate what we have, how to appreciate breathing. It was just a sad footnote to it all.
And what I bring to a relationship at any given moment is the being I am at this moment, the energy level I have, the emotional state I'm in, the quality of my spiritual and physical well-being. All of that I bring into this moment.
It was while at the University of Santa Clara that the chairman of the English department approached me, having heard that I had lectured in the DCC Gallery, and asked me if I would talk to his father's club at St. Joseph's here in San Jose, St. Joseph's High School Father's Club. So I came home and I thought about what would you talk about to a father's club. Well, Monsignors come in and talk about, tell sports stories or something. The sports figures come in and tell how prayer wins games, and Vice Squad guys come in and talk about pornography and what we're up against. So I said, I've never heard of anybody coming into a dad's club and talking about fatherhood, so I think I'll do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking again of Head of the Family, Clayton's bestseller, and the chapter on Father as Priest was the one that moved me most, I think, at the time as a young seminarian. I remember the business of blessing your children in the evening. I'm wondering if this is a way in which to make religion, if you will, spirituality relevant, meaningful, to integrate that into everyday lives, into families.
It was mentioned in the book as one, and it's something we still do. Even that little slight thing, such as blessing one's children when they come to say goodnight, and giving them the paternal blessing or the maternal blessing, lets them know that your relationship is one in God's love too. It also leaves them with your blessing, and sometimes, when I feel like it, I say, now give me your blessing, and ask the children to bless me, because they're equal with me, huh?
Sure.
I mean, they're equal as persons.
And I proceeded to talk on fatherhood, And it was a rather serious talk. I mean, there are a few levity things in it, but a rather serious talk. And when it was over, though, almost to a man, those men lined up to shake my hand and thank me, and a couple of them had tears in their eyes. They wished they had heard that before they had gotten to the point where the kids were already in high school and so on and so forth. It was in about the middle of that line, one of those guys noticed when he got up there that it was written. There's a text. And I said, well, yes. Can we have that, and so we can duplicate it for the people who weren't here and for our wives? And I said, well, you send me a few copies and you can. So he got my address and all, and I let him walk off with it. So sure enough, he sends me 50 copies of a mimeographed text. I sent it to Naomi Burton. She was with Curtis Brown, A.A. Milne's agent and so on. Was a tough cookie. She was great, wonderful. And, but anyway, she wrote back very promptly, Dear Clay, John Benton of Henry Regnery Company has been here and he's he's going to do a series of books on family life. And I gave him a copy of your speech. And he feels it will make a wonderful book for his collection out of Regnery if you are willing. And I said, sure, I'm willing, you know. I started it in Santa Clara, I wrote an outline. And what was my outline? I took the speech and I drew boxes around the 7 chapters. And then I carried that to San Francisco and I made my goal 1 chapter a week. And so the book is written and sent to New York. It then went on to win that plaque up there called the Spiritual Life Award as the best book on spiritual life by an author that year, 1961.
Well, just after that man talked to me, this woman came up. And she started crying. Immediately, she started crying. She was about 60, 65 years old, beyond menopause. And she told me, yeah, well, that's important because she told me she was crying all the time. She cried over the cauliflower in the supermarket, you know. Well, most of them cry over the broccoli. That was one of the, see, crying over the broccoli is a symptom of menopause, see, but crying over the cauliflower is something else entirely, see. They'd just be standing there in the supermarket and they start to cry over the broccoli. I ought to get a grant to study that. Anyway, she said she cried all the time. She was crying, she'd been crying for 12 years, ever since her husband died 12 years ago. He died at 11 o'clock in the morning one day talking to a patient. He was a doctor and he died 12 years ago it was, and he died that morning at Christmas time it was, and he died, and she's been crying, she cries all the time. She's been to doctors ever since, and she went on this way, and all these doctors kept telling her there's nothing wrong with her, and she knew there's something wrong with her because she was crying now, and she cried all the time. Now, I don't normally do instant therapy because it's hard on my peers. So, but in this case, at that time, I didn't know any to refer her to in the Twin Cities area. And so what I did was I asked her to go over and see the lady over there. And I said, you see if she's got a room with 2 chairs in it, and we will cure you. You look skeptical. This is known as chutzpah. It's also known as inspiring confidence in the client. It's also known as, you know, knowing what you're doing. So I brought her into this room, and I sat her down, and I said, tell me, why was it important that your husband died at Christmas time? And she said, because at Christmas time we always made up any arguments we had had, and we had had an argument, and we hadn't made it up. I said, I thought it was something like that. Yes, she says, we were giving one another silent treatment. I didn't speak to him for 3 days there, and that morning he went off to work. I didn't say goodbye to him. I didn't talk to him. I didn't make his breakfast, and I didn't phone him at the office, which I normally did, and we just, you know, I hadn't made his dinner. We just hadn't talked in 3 days, and then he died. Talking to a patient on the phone, he had a massive heart attack, and he died. I said, that's a dirty trick. That's not the way that game is played. See, people, when they play the silent treatment, think somehow they have a future. You know, they always are betting on the future. They're those people who are always never doing what it is they're doing, see, and the quality of the relationship, we can have this lousy relationship because we're going to, you know, you're not going to die on me. So I said, well, you remember what he looked like? She said, of course I do. I said, fine, put him in that chair over there. So I had her put him in that chair over there, and I had her tell him all the things she would have told him had she known he was going to die that morning. So she told him all the things she would have told him, and she just barreled out this wonderful statement, this marvelous expression of love, and asked forgiveness, and oh, it was just fantastic. She'd been rehearsing it for about 12 years, see, and mentally, and she gave this out, and then I said, now move over there, you know him very well, what would he have said? He used to say it every Christmas, you see, when they'd make up, and so she told herself what he would have told her, and then I had her move back and respond to that, and she did that, and I had her move back and respond to that, and she did that, and I had her move back and respond to that. This is known as going crazy. Talking to yourself. It's also therapeutically known as working closure on the past.
The doorbell rang at about 8:30 at night. The kids were all pretty well down, and I was up, and I answered the door, and it was a poet from North Beach, and he was frantic. He was absolutely frantic. He said, "Mr. Barbeau, I don't know of anywhere else to go, but I'm being tormented by the devil. I'm just being tormented by the devil, and I have this room up at the top of the building. When I go to this room, in recent weeks, the smell is of sulfur, and their voices come at me from the bed, and they're horrendous. They're just horrendous. It's petrifying, and it's just awful. And the stench it's just awful. And there's this awful laughter and everything else. Now, you see, if I were to tell the psychiatrist that, if he'd gone to one that evening, and I'm not putting down all psychiatrists, they'd have him hospitalized. If most therapists were confronted with that, they'd try to find somebody to refer him to, because he obviously was paranoid schizophrenic, or he was having delusions of, da-da-da. Instead, I said, well, I want to thank you very much for having the wisdom to come and see me. Because, I said, you wait right here for a minute, I've got to get something. And I went and got a little tiny bottle of holy water that was nearby. And I came in and I said, now, you may or may not know it, but I'm a Roman Catholic. And in the Catholic Church, we have what is called holy water. And it's at the font at the entrance of every church, because you cross yourself with that, because the devil really can't stand holy water. It's been blessed by the sacred candle on Easter Sunday. And I said, so here's what I want you to do. This is a bottle of holy water. Now, when you go back to your room this evening, I want you to sprinkle that real rapidly around the room. Whether it smells or whether there's talking, you just sprinkle it fast. And you say, in the name of Christ, go to hell, Satan. That's all you have to do, and it'll go. Now, that's not bona fide therapy, but it was the right thing to do for him. Well, one evening I was flying home from Minneapolis on a basically empty 747. Nobody else in my compartment. And so the steward came in and gave me this bottle of champagne, saying, there's nobody else here. You may as well have it. We were now up in the air. Drinking this champagne, and I'm thinking, Barbeau, you're dead. Intellectually, creatively, you're dead. You haven't said a new thing in 2 years. They just want to hear more of the same, and da-da-da-da-da. When we landed, your mother said, how'd it go? And I said, well, it went fine, as usual. I said, however, I've come to the decision. I probably will have 2 weeks of letters on the desk asking for more of the same, and probably some phone messages for more of the same, and I'm going to say no to all of them. And she said, oh? I kept trying to think of, I've got to find some way of supporting the family while I do writing, period, creative writing, not nonfiction article here and there and so on and so forth. And I was going through these machinations anyway, and quite bewildered, and I had the feeling that I was leaning against this wall I had come down this road, I was up against this wall, and it was too high to climb over. There were no doors or windows. It went as far as the eye could see in each way, and I was now just leaning against the wall trying to figure out what to do. And one morning I woke up. See, when you turn it over to your unconscious, it helps a lot. One morning I woke up and I was on the other side of the wall because it dawned on me. I had been defining myself as a writer who happened to be a people helper, when really I was a people helper who happened to be a writer. And it was just like, I was sitting on the edge of the bed. I was just getting out of bed when it struck me. I was going to be seeing 4 people that day who had made appointments with me. And I wasn't going to be charging them because I didn't have a license. Now, so the next thing you know, I'm over at Lone Mountain and I'm enrolling in the graduate program and passed with flying colors.
If we are in a process of growing, then every day we better be different and new and constantly renewing and learning new things and having more energy and more life and more vitality. That's what it's supposed to be about when we talk about growing up. And the reason one stays married is not necessarily the reason one got married. So that's why I say thank God when somebody says, "You're not the man I married." I would hope not. I used to say to publicly, I used to say, "You know something? I never learned anything from my successes. I only learned from my failures." See? I only learned from my failures. When I try to walk through that wall and discover there's not a door there, then I learn from that. I don't try to walk through it again. I used to say that all the time until one day Myra heard me say it. And Myra said, "That's baloney." I said, "Oh?" She said, "You succeeded in marrying me and you learned a hell of a lot." One evening, Myra and I were watching a program that I had wanted to see, Lou Grant. And so we were watching that. And then Myra got up and said, "I'm going to go to bed a little early this evening because I'm tired. I got up an hour and a half earlier this morning than usual because I wanted to vouch for so-and-so at the immigration department." I said, "Okay." And I stood up because that was kind of a signal. You see, we weren't going to make love, and we made a lot of love, which is one of the ways you stay young. You make a lot of love, see? And so I stood up and I embraced her passionately. I kissed her passionately. I said, "I love you madly. God bless you and good night." And she went upstairs and died. Now, what would I have said to her had I known that she was going to have an explosion in the brain 5 minutes later? Anything different? No. Okay. The fact is that, therefore, I didn't have a lot of negative unfinished business. Hadn't had for a long time.
I believe in the power of love, love of God, and love of people, and I believe that that power can influence the future.
Well, one of the things that happens is, for the male, females have a rougher time, I think, when they're widowed. My brother Bill came to town about 2 weeks after the funeral, and he was going to be with a bunch of politicians on a fishing boat and invited me along. And during the course of that, he said, "You know, after the funeral, all the Barbeau gang went down back to Sacramento, and they went to Bedell's restaurant or someplace like that." He said, and they had all dined together. Major topic of conversation among the women was how many women were sharpening their nails for you at the funeral. And I said, I noticed 2 or 3, and I found it very off-putting. He said they weren't talking 2 or 3, they were talking 2 or 3 dozen. I said, well, women know women, you know. But there were. And within days of the funeral, there were women offering to bring casseroles over for the kids, or to cook for the meals for the kids, or to bring me a bag of cookies, or, you know, if you need a place to lay your head, if you need a refuge from if you need a babysitter, you name it.
Very often I get people in who are divorcing or want a divorce or think their problems are related to various vices they see the partner as having, all of which were originally translated as virtues when they were going together. Like the guy who was going to dump his bride because she's sloppy, careless, and irresponsible, who married her because she was so carefree and spontaneous. Or the gal who's going to dump her husband because he's her pet rock, he's non-communicative, doesn't talk, has never been intimate with her, they have 3 children, been married 9 years, and he doesn't talk to her. She married him because he was a strong, silent type, solid and dependable.
You know, when a woman comes in and she's going to divorce her husband because he doesn't listen to me, he doesn't pay any attention to what I want, he moved the family out to California without even asking, he just made these plans and arranged for the home and everything else because he wanted to change his business location, and da-da-da-da. He never consults me on any da-da-da-da. And they go down this list of things of the way he's just, you know, she doesn't count in any of these things. And then you ask a simple question like, tell me, what attracted you to him before you got married? What caused you to commit matrimony with this man? Well, he was one of the first men I knew who was really knew what he wanted and took steps to achieve it. I said, he's still doing that. But now you find it doesn't leave room for you, you know. So you might want to work on that with him, you know. And I got a, what was Now, Maureen, I met in a church where a friend of hers had dragged her to the front pew because the friend wanted to tape me, and with my permission wanted to tape me. And Maureen wanted to be in the back because she had never heard of me, never seen me, never whatever. And she had had a full day at the EPRI, executive secretary there and so on. And if I was a bore, she was going to go home. Well, as it turned out, at one point in my talk, I'm strutting forth, and as I say, I don't use podiums anymore, or notes, you know, so I'm strutting forth, and I'm saying, is it a better thing to be daydreaming about kissing you tomorrow, to be remembering having kissed you yesterday, or to be kissing you right now? And I'm standing over her at this time. When I said this, I was talking to the whole audience, right? And she looked up and said, not me, you don't, in a voice as loud as mine. The audience roared, and I thought, who the hell are you? And at the break, I went over and I said, who the hell are you? And she told me, I know where she is at any time, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and with regard to me or whatever the world. We have very clear communication.
Stop disowning ourselves. We are constantly saying, I don't know what got into me that I did that. Or, that wasn't like me. Or, gee, that was very unusual. I must have been out of my mind. You weren't out of your mind. You were right there. That was like you. It absolutely was like you. It was you. Nothing got into you but you. We do that when we constantly try to disown things that one part of us tells us we shouldn't have done. So then we say, that wasn't me, you know. But rather, when we do certain things that we think are a bit out of the ordinary for us, then own them. That was me. And get acquainted with that side of ourselves, because to some degree, that's the way we get acquainted with all of ourselves.
Okay, so I had this very tall, lanky character who came in, and very nervous, very edgy. He had heard me talk on one of the campuses nearby, and when I said, what brings you in? He said, I want to live. What have you been doing for all these years, if not living? And he said, well, I don't have any friends, and he started in on this story. It turned out he was an only child of an unmarried alcoholic lady who used as a babysitter a closet in the apartment. And when she went out to get drunk at a bar and bring back a guy, or not bring back a guy, but half the time she brought back a guy, he was locked in the closet all night. And in the morning, he would be released from the closet. And of course, this made him kind of timid. as well as making it a little difficult for him to have any friends over because his mother was drunk most of the time. I mean, off and on, real binges, but most of the time just well-oiled in alcohol. He had very few friends, and he was raised in this atmosphere. And then came the time that but he was a good student. He was a very good student, and he loved science. So he was now, he had gone to a nearby university, and he had gotten his degree, and he had a job in this science lab where, unfortunately, from my point of view, he was working alone. And in the morning, a messenger would come with all these various vials and things that he was supposed to classify or whatever. And in the afternoon, towards the end of the day, the messenger would come to pick up those things and with the results of his tests and so on. But otherwise, he had no human contact all day. And nobody had ever been in his apartment, which was down near the bay, down near the ocean, actually. It was down near Ocean Beach. And so as I learned all this about him, I gave him some homework. I said, you know, I give my clients homework. And your homework for this week is to get up about 45 minutes earlier than you're used to, since he was only a few blocks from the beach, and to put on some clothes that you don't mind getting a little sandy or wet, because what I want you to do is to go right down to the ocean's edge and run along the beach. And about every 20 steps, I want you to turn, face the ocean, throw your arms in the air and say, "Wow, I'm alive." And then continue rushing, continue your run. And then you turn it back and do the same thing backwards, back to your former location. And then you can go home and change and go to work. Do you want me to do that? I said, well, you came to me, you want to learn how to live, and I'm giving you one of the first lessons. And so I really urge you to do that. Well, when I looked silly, I said, you're in San Francisco, and you're afraid of looking silly? I said, just do it, and I'll see you next. And now, meanwhile, all the while this is going on, we're talking, he's still like this. Well, he comes in the second week, and he's like this, and he says, "Well, I did what you told me," and you can see just in his body that things have changed a little bit, He says, "I did what you, but I just couldn't bring myself to shout at the ocean." Jump in the air. But I did run along the beach, and I did turn, and but I didn't shout. I said, well, you're making progress. You're making progress. I said, but you mentioned something about playing tennis when you were in college. You learned to play tennis. Yeah, I played tennis. I said, well, where are your tennis rackets? Oh, well, I have them at home in the closet, but I'm not sure they're okay right now. They've been years since I used them. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I want you to do for your homework. And we dealt, by the way, on a certain emotional level with some of the other issues, but this was his homework. I gave him the homework of getting those rackets out. The moment he went away from our session, he was to take those rackets and get them restrung. And then he was to go down to, which was close by for him, the Golden Gate Park, to the tennis courts, where the rules were, at that time, I don't know what they might be now, but you could chalk your name in on a list, and it was free. You got to play the winner of whoever was left from the last person's playing on the court. And and wait your turn and play tennis with somebody. So he came into the next session. He was very agitated. He jumped out of the chair about 3 or 4 times, stalked across the room and back. Well, I did what you told me to do. I got the tennis racket strung, and I bought the new ball, and I went down there, and it turned out there was a man and a woman. They were playing tennis, and the guy left, and it was now, and she had won the game, and so I had to I ended up playing this woman. And see, one of my strategies in my own head was, and I'm not a tennis player really at all, was that when you're playing tennis, you have to, you know, and you have to occasionally shout love. I just thought it was a nice ploy. Anyway, he's jumping. He says, so I played and this very nice lady, and we played a game, and she won. And then we played another set, and she won that one too. And then it was really time for lunch, and so she said, well, how would you like to go to lunch? And so I went to lunch with her, and I went to lunch with her, and then we made we made a date to go out to dinner at some future time, so it'll be tomorrow evening. Actually, we're going to dinner, and I'm going to have to quit therapy. This is too exhilarating.
And to pay attention is to lay down your life for a few minutes that somebody else gets to live more abundantly in your presence. To really be there for that other person, even if you can't help them, or even if, you know, whatever. Just paying attention. And once again, you've paid me the tribute of a marvelous degree of attention, laid down an enormous quantity of lifetime, and I hope we've redeemed it. Not only with a little bit of laughter, but also with some insight. And I thank you very much for the great love you've shown me.